Hey everyone. The most common error people make in the old world is assuming that their decisions are truly their own. They are not. In the year 2026, in an interconnected AI networked world, every action you take is a reaction to another's action. This is called interdependence. If you are not considering the other player, you are not playing the game. You are simply a constant in someone else's equation. The primary rule of game theory is that you don't play the board, you play the individual or the AI on the other side. This leads to a scenario that can push a territorial class individual to the brink of insanity, but it's precisely where the sovereign individual spots their opportunity. The recursive trap. The state's AI aims to anticipate your exit. It searches for indications of asset liquidation and passport renewal. Winning requires reading AI's movements. It then requires you to convince AI you are staying put, but your actual assets are already transacted in a dark ledger. Asymmetric information. Winning hinges on knowing the unknowable. For instance, knowing a law is set to pass before it is made public, or knowing a charter city is about to open its borders gives you a competitive advantage. This is the archetypal example used by the central authority to disband collective resistance. It's the snitch logic powering the 2026 Panopticon grid. The incentive to defect. Suppose you play a game with two mutually beneficial outcomes, but when one side defects, i.e. goes against the agreement, that one gains a lot while the cooperative side loses it all. You cannot assume the other side will not defect, so to rationally deceive them is to play a defection game. The sovereign solution. This is done by changing the paradigm from one-shot games to infinite games. When you partake in a neural guild, you are not doing a single transaction, you are committing to a lifetime of collaboration. Although being banned from a guild for life isn't fun, it's still not worth it to betray a partner. In 2026 Kinetic Frontier, being predictable equals being captured. The state's prediction models are built on a rational, aka cheap or lawful decision. Strategic randomness. The most rational choice can be to introduce a wildcard. If the AI directing traffic assumes you'll take the highway because it's the quickest, you take the side roads instead. You pay time to buy invisibility. The value of the exit. The state assumes you'll stay because moving is hard. The sovereign individual reduces the cost of moving to the point where it is rational to leave the moment a jurisdiction becomes predatory.
The state wants you to think that some people winning means that others must lose in the 2026 Panopticon. That's called zero-sum thinking. Ever heard of the bucket of crabs? One of those crabs tries to escape from the bucket, and the rest all pull it back down to not let it escape. The state wants you to be more focused on your neighbor to see if they are winning and to try to fight them for the little bit of money and resources they have. The state's economy system is all tax money, digital CBDCs, and social credit system penalties are all zero-sum moves, ways to win the game. The state takes from your sovereignty to feed their stability. The best you can do if you play the game normally at a state level is to be the last one not eaten. The sovereign individual takes a different approach. The game of positive sum is when 1 + 1 = 3. This is the logic of the neural guild and the dark ledger. When you collaborate with other sovereigns off the grid, you generate new value. The state is not giving you a bakery, they are just giving you a pie. You are not just dividing a pie, you are building a bakery. To win a zero-sum game against a predator, you must decouple your resources from their board. Your money can simply be erased with the click of a button. However, if your money is stored in decentralized protocols, the situation is different. If you leave the system, the network becomes stronger. We are progressing to a sort of parallel society, a society where sovereigns can create a trusted community and trade skills, information, and even assets, forming an internal economy that is completely outside the visibility of traditional economic analytics up to 2026. It is nothing but a positive-sum game. The more participants in the parallel society, the more difficult the state will find any of its members.
The state doesn't just listen to what you say, it listens for your signal. The algorithm attempts to identify the sovereign moves among the millions of social media posts that are considered noise. If you want to be successful, you must learn to conceal your signal in the noise. The 2026 Panopticon employs predictive linguistics and sentiment analysis. Using specific words like exit, dark ledger, or sovereign can get you flagged. Effective communication means the opposite of silence. It means talking in a manner that the algorithm designates as noise while your comrades detect the signal. In game theory, data is the most critical component. The discipline of hiding a message is called steganography. In 2026, our actions will conceal messages. This action may be as simple as buying an unused bus ticket to disrupt a predictive model or engaging in a public CBDC transaction to disguise a private decentralized one. In a communication-hostile environment, the main objective is to demonstrate that you possess information while refraining from actually providing the information. This is called zero-knowledge proof. They can evaluate each other's standing and confirm their resources without the state seeing how the assets are distributed. When the state increases their surveillance, the sovereign individual increases the noise. By overwhelming the system with false signals, such as fake travel plans, contradictory data, and other random digital activity, tracking someone becomes more costly than the potential value of monitoring. You become computationally expensive to track. How can one such as yourself align with others when all of their communications are being monitored? How do you act as a collective when you do not have a leader who could be taken by the state? You employ a Schelling point. Schelling points are solutions that individuals tend to default to in a situation where there is a lack of direct communication, as a solution might feel appropriate, unique, or relevant to a person. A Schelling point is a focal point for coordination. Suppose you and a friend are told to go to a city for an appointment at noon, and you're not allowed to talk to each other to specify a meeting point. Where do you think the majority of attendees would go? Likely the central train station or an iconic landmark. We don't need a telegram in 2026. This is applicable to the digital and physical exits. We only need to know the most logical point of escape. This is why many sovereigns look for Schelling points in mathematics and code. Once the state's currency collapses, the Schelling point for value is the hardest money there is. No one needs to tell you to use it. The logic of the game means that all of the other players will be searching for the same lifeboat. A Schelling point is frequently an instance of Nash equilibrium. No player is able to gain an advantage by unilaterally changing his or her strategies while the other players do not change their strategies. For parallel society, the most relevant Schelling point is the one that constrains the most of your freedom and your risk. As soon as sufficient numbers of sovereigns move to a dark ledger or a charter city, it becomes the stable choice for the rest of the Panopticon prisoners. The sovereign individual utilizes the state's surveillance to his or her advantage through Schelling points. The more noise created by the state, the more truth will be revealed to the enlightened. No banners and no speeches. All that is required is to move to the point that the logic of freedom becomes irrefutable.
The future social credit system has an expected release date of 2026 and has complex design under the title of Mechanism Design. They have gamified compliance and give you green lane travel for sharing your data and give you discounted CBDC rates for staying under your carbon quota. They have systematically engineered your submission as the so-called rational economic choice. While it appears that you are forced to do this, this is actually the case that it is too costly to refuse. The sovereign response. We search for the design bug in these systems, as all systems have edge cases. The state gives an incentive to a specific digital behavior. In response, we give the data to that behavior, optimally without the real digital behavior. We use the state's incentivization to fund our exit. The state, in mechanism design, assumes the role of the designer while you are the player.
The outcome state wants most is the surrender of your private data, the amount of money you have, your position, and your future plans. They encourage this via truth-telling mechanisms. The truth is that the state will use every user agreement and every security patch as a mechanism to get you to show your cards. The sovereign individual is and will remain an incompleteness variable. By providing data that is inconsistent, you will short-circuit the state's mechanism. If the AI doesn't know your type, it can't build an incentive structure to lure you. A key part of the 2026 state is one person, one ID, which means they can associate each individual action with a reputation score. In game theory, a Sybil attack happens when one player uses multiple identities to game the system. The state considers this fraud, while the sovereign individual considers it identity diversification. The multi-persona strategy. By deliberately splitting your digital identity across multiple jurisdictions and protocols, you ensure that no single system is able to capture your complete self. You become invisible to the algorithm as you look like 10 different people and no one has enough signal to warrant a patrol. The social contract is a euphemism for coercion. In 2026, the state has refined the sticks to digital punishments, but no system works without the collusion of the participants. By shifting your values to a neural guild, you effectively nullify the state's stimuli. The ultimate defection. When you decide that the state's social credit or legal standing have no value, the state's mechanism fails. You've achieved mechanism immunity status. The law wants you to view life as an isolated, single encounter. They want you to look at life like it is you against everyone else. But that's not the case. When you think you're not going to see someone ever again, the rational move in life is to lie, cheat, steal, or abandon trust. But as a person who has the independent spirit, you are participating in an iterated game. In contrast to the single encounter game, where the default is to be selfish, in the case of iterated games, you are better off being cooperative, because that's how trust is established, and defection guarantees everyone you play with will not want to play with you again. The sovereign state can take your money with a click, but an independent spirit thrives because trust is more valuable than money. This trust comes from being part of the community who values their word. This is where the most effective and successful game theory strategy comes in with the tit-for-tat strategy. It's a good strategy to use because you want to be the one to take the first step to create cooperation, and from then on, you simply repeat the same action as the other. We relate this to the neural guilt. We reward kindness with kindness, and we are a black hole to those who betray the guilt. Reputation is not a social credit score issued by a bureaucrat. It is a distributed system of your reputation in repeated games. When the global financial system blinks, people won't care about your LinkedIn or your credit score. They will care if you stood up when the dark ledger was getting blitzed. The shadow of the future is what stabilizes the parallel society. If you know that your survival hinges on the people you are working with today, you won't defect. The state tries to shorten your horizon, making you live paycheck to paycheck, fear to fear, so you don't see the shadow. We extend it. Winning the long game is what it means to be anti-fragile. The state systems break down with the stress, while the networks of the sovereign individual strengthen. Each time the state attempts to crack a guild, the survivors knit closer and the price of betrayal rises. You aren't merely surviving, you are evolving. If the job you do and the money you make are untouchable and in places inaccessible to the powers that be, you can change countries as easily as you change a SIM card. Think of countries as telecommunications service providers. Instead of considering a country your home, think of it as a service provider. If a restaurant gives you food poisoning and then tries to charge you double, you don't stay there and vote for a new chef, you walk out. Once enough people do this, these states are forced into a positive-sum race to actually treat us like customers instead of subjects. This is not a labor strike, it is a strike of capital and intelligence. You are not fighting the machine, you are making yourself too expensive to track and too mobile to pin down. You refuse to be a piece on their board any longer, and that is how you win the game. The goal is a Nash equilibrium of the free individual. This is when you are in the position of your choosing, with people that respect you and all your resources are intact. In this state, the reach of the state's club cannot touch you, and your collaboration with other sovereign individuals is at its fullest. In the panopticon, the state depends on information cascades. In game theory, cascades happen because some people use the visible behaviors of others to make decisions instead of relying on their own private information. If all of the people in a predatory jurisdiction stay, the so-called rational person believes they should stay as well. State wins by controlling the appearance of compliance. But traffic cascades can flow in the opposite direction as well. The first sovereign individual to exit and stay free of the state sends out a signal which can be heard over the noise of inaction. If the third person follows this individual, the rational calculation among a million gray stickmen changes. Instead of remaining, the most rational decision, all things considered, becomes moving toward the exit. This is what allows the centralized system to collapse overnight. Cascades are what makes a centralized system so fragile, and when a central system is fragile, you can expect that a destroying cascade will occur when the environment becomes hostile enough. Especially so when some people exit as soon as they start experiencing mild discomfort. In contrast, some will remain until severe disruptions, such as open warfare, are present. The state utilizes predictive models to manage the environment so that pressure remains just below the threshold of early adopters to cascades. State wants to keep individuals just happy enough in order to prevent them from triggering the cascade. The signal the sovereign individual sends out acts as a weapon because it lowers the threshold to trigger it for everyone else. When you show evidence of your exit, you show the dark ledger works, the charter city is secure, and the state's options to control you are out of the picture. You create positive-sum information loops and make freedom contagious. A centralized system is fragile because it is predicated on the assumption that everyone is complying. This is the common knowledge problem in game theory. The moment it is common knowledge that the state's currency is fraudulent and that there are blind spots in the state's surveillance, the system collapses. The state is a giant that only exists as long as we voluntarily choose to look down. As sovereigns, we do not attack the state, we simply increase the state's fragility. By establishing alternative systems of trust and value, we shift the state's systems to the periphery. When the rational choice is no longer to utilize the state's banking system or to obey its regulations, the collapse will ensue. We are the initial conditions that fundamentally alter the entire outcome of the game. We have reached the sovereign synthesis. This is where we merge the zero-knowledge proofs of the shadow, the Nash equilibrium of the free individual, and the viral cascades of the exit. In the kinetic frontier, you're no longer playing the state's game. You've set up a parallel board where the state's moves are simply not computable. The sovereign synthesis is where your digital, financial, and physical being integrates to limit your surface area. Utilizing decentralized ledgers for your value and encrypted protocols for your signal creates a shield that the state's mechanism design cannot circumvent. You are not simply hiding, you are becoming computationally unstoppable. The ultimate goal of game theory is to move from zero-sum conflict to positive-sum collaboration. While the state lives off of parasitically siphoning your resources, zero-sum, the neural guild survives by positive-sum creating value that didn't previously exist. When you contribute to the dark ledger or finish a secure charter city, you are raising the payout for every other sovereign. This is the network effect of freedom. By synthesizing these lessons, you exceed robustness, the ability to resist a shock, and enter anti-fragility, the ability to grow from a shock. The state's new security patches, CBDC pushes, and recent regulation changes are all seen as marketing for the sovereign individual. The synthesis culminates in the silent exit. There are no signs, no speeches, and no disembodied voices calling to the crowd. It is an asset and identity relocation to the point where the freedom they espouse is incontrovertible. You become a ghost participant in the former system while becoming a founding citizen in the latter. The terminal node signifies the endpoint of a game tree in game theory. For the state in 2026, the terminal node signifies total control through CBDCs and social credit systems. For the sovereign, it's total autonomy in a parallel society. Each of us has our own finish line, and we filter every decision through that finish line. If a route doesn't head towards your terminal node, you eliminate it, regardless of how easy it might be in the present. Backward induction is a technique that enables you to arrive at the sub-game perfect equilibrium. It's a strategy that is deemed best in every sub-game or stage of the journey. In 2026, the state will attempt to present you with mini-games, i.e. small incentives in exchange for minor concessions. Using backward induction, you will find that success in these mini-games actually means defeat in the bigger game. You defer today's optimal move to guarantee tomorrow's perfect move. The state operates on non-credible threats. They threaten unlimited arrests, taxes, and even the shutdown of the internet. However, when you work from the end, you see that they simply lack the means to do all of that. You alter the game by calling their bluff. A threat can only become a real move if it is believable. If the state stands to lose more than it would gain by enforcement at the game's final stage, they won't take the shot. The synthesis of backward induction serves as your own game plan. Picture this, it's the year 2030. You find yourself in your charter city, your assets safe in the dark ledger, and you start working your way back to 2029, 2028, and up to this moment in 2026. Every line of code you write, each asset you transfer, and each partnership you establish are all in moves in a game where the outcome is already predetermined. You are not taking a blind shot. You are executing a plan. Traditional societies are often a mix of hawks, the state or aggressors, and doves, the compliant public. Usually, hawks dominate until there are too many hawks and they destroy each other. But the sovereign individual introduces a third player, the owl. The owl doesn't fight the hawk and doesn't submit like the dove. The owl simply flies to a different tree where the hawk's claws can't reach. Because the owl survives better than the dove and avoids the hawk's costs, the owl strategy eventually takes over the forest. Organisms don't just adapt to their environment, they change it. This is niche construction. By building the Dark Ledger, the Neural Guild, and the Charter Cities, we are constructing a niche where only sovereigns can thrive. The state's tools, inflation, surveillance, and regulation, are like toxic gas. We've built our own oxygen supply. To a sovereign, the state's hostile environment is actually a filter that keeps the doves out and brings the owls together. In game theory, the success of a strategy often depends on how many people are using it. When only one person is a sovereign, they are an outlier and easy to crush. But as the frequency of sovereigns increases, the state's ability to parasitize the population drops. Once we hit a certain percentage of the population, the tipping point, the state's business model becomes insolvent. It costs them more to police us than they can ever take from us. At that point, sovereignty becomes the only stable way to live. Evolution doesn't go backward. Once a species learns a better way to hunt or hide, it doesn't unlearn it. Once the independent spirit realizes that the state is a service provider and not a god, the spell is broken forever. You cannot turn an owl back into a dove. We are the irreversible mutation in the 2026 game. The foundation of this technique is the Bayesian update. You have to start with a prior belief, an assumption. Each time you obtain fresh data, a new legislation, a new bank cap, a new signal from a guild, you revise your belief.
A sovereign typically will not say, "I know exactly what will happen." Instead, they say, "Considering the last move of the state, the chances of a total freeze have increased by 15%, and I am relocating my assets to adjust to that." Since we cannot perceive each other's type, sovereign versus agent, we utilize signaling. A signal is an expensive move that an agent would not wish to undertake, while a sovereign would. This could be, say, a certain encrypted communication, or a certain dark ledger donation. In contrast, we employ screening, establishing barriers that only a bona fide independent spirit is capable of overcoming. This permits the use of mathematics to authenticate intent and fosters trust in a low-trust environment. The state is also involved in a Bayesian game. They are attempting to type the rest of the population. They introduce a minor security patch, a restriction, and observe who is compliant. If you follow their direction, they modify their assumption about you being a dove, but if you defy them, you have implied that you are an owl. The goal of the sovereign is to keep strategic ambiguity. You want to remain within the state's error margin until the time of your silent exit. In a Bayesian world, the worst thing one could embrace is certainty. If one is 100% certain the state will not do something, one is not engaging in game theory, one is gambling. We exist in the distribution of outcomes and not the certainty of outcomes. We hedge, we diversify, and we update. The first person to collapse their reality is the one who updates first. The individual that updates their reality the quickest is the first to survive the dismantling of the old reality.
Guilds are able to evaluate their strengths using the Shapley value method. This method enables the guild to evaluate the gains of the coalition in regards to the individual contributions of the members. With regards to a sovereign coalition, your value does not depend on the rank you hold in the old world, but on the value you contribute to the guild, whether that is in the form of code, capital, or security. When a guild wins, each person receives a prize that is equal to the amount of prize in relation to the amount of risk they each earned. This also leads to the coalition being stable, as there is no incentive for anyone to leave or defect. In a context of game theory, the core refers to the outcomes in which no subgroup has the incentive to leave to create their own coalition. The social contract of the state is not in the core, as it is a suboptimal deal for the productive, which is how the breakaway begins. The design of the neural guild is meant to remain in the core. If we demonstrate that the independent spirit is better off remaining in the guild as opposed to being outside it or returning to the state, we create a system that is impossible to dismantle from within. The state's guild fears because of super additivity. A coalition's worth is greater than the sum of its parts. For example, a single sovereign is a nuisance, but 1,000 sovereigns with a shared dark ledger, mesh network, and charter city are a civilization. We pool our computing power and capital to create infrastructures that no single person can afford, but that can be used by all. The ultimate goal of the kinetic frontier is the Grand Coalition. This is when the parallel society becomes so vast and efficient that for the first time it becomes a rational move for state employees to join us. When the state's guards realize they are better protected by the guild's reputation system than by the state's collapsing pension, they will defect. We do not have to win a war, we have to provide a better game.
Final equilibrium occurs as we transcend the state's mechanism design. A mechanism is only as good as the rewards and punishments it can impose on agents. With zero knowledge proofs and the state's monopoly on decentralized value determination, we circumvent the state's capacity to exert either. When the rational decision for the majority of productive people is to disregard the state's rules and currency, the mechanism of the state effectively ceases. This is mathematically winning without firing a shot, and certainly a victory of mathematics over the monopolies. The moment we reach final equilibrium, the shift becomes unilateral. In game theory, this is a locked-in effect. When a sufficient number of owls have left the proverbial forest, the hawks have nothing left to feed on other than each other. The state's infrastructure disintegrates because it can no longer draw on the tax energy required for self-sustenance. The parallel society doesn't have to revolt against anything, it only has to endure until the old system is worn out. The entire 14 modules of the course essentially condenses into a singular executable command: exit. Each lesson, from Nash equilibriums to information cascades, was meant to tell you that exit is undoubtedly the only remaining rational choice on the board. You are the predicate of an epoch. By shifting your own tactics, you have transformed the scenario for an entire genus. The 20th century's game has finished. The game of the sovereign individual has commenced.